you are.
The first point that we came up with that we thought was important is that when you decide to take on servant leadership is that the leader, starting from the top, everyone has to believe in this and understand the importance of it. So the leaders need to learn to be comfortable and demonstrate through the actions. And those actions would be the priorities, busy day, but you have to be proactive about that and make the priorities through the leadership. And then one of the other areas that we talked about is that following up with the engagement. We thought that was really important, that as they had discussed, walking the floor, talking with the people, following up with a phone call, following up with the email, but that active discussion that takes place.
I have a face for radio, though, Dick. I shouldn't go to the camera. So we came up with some things, but one of the topics that we were really struck by the presentation was engaged versus disengaged. How many engaged people you really need to have to make up for that one person that is disengaged, and we found that very interesting. We asked the question, well, how do you do that? How do you deal with that cynic or that real disengaged person? And came up with the process of just, number one, listening. Number two, answering questions, reflective questions, like why do you feel that way? Why do you have that perception? But then also providing examples if the person says, we're not servant leadership, no way, being able to provide examples where you do see that. And also recognizing, I use the metaphor all the time, 12-year-old scotch isn't made in 12 days, that it's a process, that you need to continue on it. I think another thing that we talked about then too was, that 40% of prioritizing your workday and your activity as a leader to servant leadership, that was something that really stuck out to us. And I know from an HR perspective where I'm at, I was asking the question, is our reward system where I work connected with servant leadership and activities specific to that? So good discussion.
All right, our group had we had about 7 or 8, so we had to narrow it down here. The one that we came back with was that the organization needs to allocate resources for organizational change to ensure the sustainability of it. The change to servant leadership is a thought process that takes long-term planning with many checkpoints along the way. As the speaker had said, he could come in 6 to 12 months and see a bell curve shift, but that cliff is going to be shortly behind him. And we felt that the allocating resources to long-term sustainability was important.
So we talked about what one of our members of our discussion mentioned was a cascade of leadership, and that the leadership, it goes from the valet to the physician to every layer of the organization, but how can it cascade from each level to each level? That was one thought that we had. Recognition through levels. Great quote by Geneva. She referenced Frances Hesselbein. Leaders be, not do. They're be. They exist, right? They don't do, right? They're not doers. And that resonated with us. And then something that brought up a lively discussion was the idea that don't be a flake at work. So that got into the question of, there is a fine level of discernment that happens. Do you stay in the game or do you leave the organization? When you don't feel like your leader cares for you, you're not being recognized, how do you discern that time, whether to stay in there or be a flake? So those were the few things that we discussed.
We had a great discussion at our table as well. 3 takeaways for us. We got into a discussion about time, the time it takes to do some of this walking around and doing the recognition and so forth. And we started talking about the leader's role as really 3 discrete pieces. First, the tasks that we all have to do, and we're wearing a lot of hats. Second, these personal interactions that are very important. And third, our own personal development. So just that need to sort of balance those 3 elements to make sure that we're not just focused on our tasks, because, I don't have time to be a servant leader. The second major takeaway was a kind of a couple of things that John shared with us. Reminder one was this: real change starts with real dissatisfaction. So as your organization is thinking about making a change, where is that dissatisfaction and how can you leverage that to make change? And a second reminder of the soft launch and how important that is, rather than kind of coming in with maybe what is perceived to be the flavor of the day. And then just the third element, we talked a lot about command and control versus other management styles and leadership styles. And yeah, command and control might be a tool in your toolbox that you might have to pull out from time to time, but recognizing that's just one tool of many that you can use.
Two parts or two pieces that we wanted to share. One is that everyone has a voice and is an important part of the change process, or plays an important part of the change process, and that it's truly important that compromise and true discussion take place when releasing the information. The second one was the way the information is delivered makes a huge difference. It's important that the process is collaborative and that a consensus is being built during the process.
We also had a rich conversation. I think we had 10 different points and then looked at themes, and 3 themes struck us. We began our whole conversation with the 4-to-1 ratio and how to move that, and moving it by nuanced and careful attention to mission is what came up in our group. We were taken by, when mission becomes personal, it becomes a cause and then drives the organization forward. The be your own CEO, be accountable for your own unit, your own program, your space, links with that. Another key, a second point for us was, as a key driver, is the relationship building, of course, and that is to have a real, as we see in so many of these themes, an authentic, transparent conversation with folks with one another. And finally, we had some conversations about the rollout process, and that for this to work and for the organization to move forward, a real authenticity, we like the word gravity, building gravity in the organization around these principles is a critical piece.
We too had a really fruitful conversation. There were several points that we had, but we can start with that bottom 25 or 30% that may not changed. We had a gentleman. Can you remind me of your name? Jim had a good acronym for those folks. He called them cave dwellers. Those are citizens against virtually everything, and that happens. But knowing, we expanded on that, and wherever those group of cave dwellers are, you also can feel empowered knowing that you can be, quote unquote, the CEO of your own area, and you can make that change from the top down. But if it's not coming from the top down, you can make it in your zone, in the area that you have some control over. So you can be a servant leader, and you can start that culture of change. And then I guess I will end with kind of a practical tool that we discussed as a group. Kim brought up the 4 affirmations. This is something that she does with different groups of students, but you could be applicable to employees as well. And that's starting with having folks thinking of 2 strengths that make them good at accomplishing whatever their end goal is that they're trying to achieve, but then also thinking of 2 weaknesses and turning those weaknesses on their head. So if a weakness of yours is being sloppy, you would think about that and you'd say, well, maybe I will flip it to being organized. And so keeping those 2 strengths and the 2 weaknesses you're turning into your strengths that you're trying to achieve, keeping those up in front of you throughout the entire project. And so it's just a way of changing your vision in order to achieve the goals you're looking for.